Mignonne, you ready?
I am.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Russ Yelton.
And I'm Mignonne Hollis.
We're very thrilled to have you here today for our discussion around rural programming, around economic development around the state. And Mignonne, would you like to introduce yourself?
I sure would. Thank you so much, Russ. I'm Mignonne Hollis. I'm the Executive Director for the Arizona Regional Economic Development Foundation down here in Cochise County. And I'm also the current president of the Arizona Association for Economic Development.
And I'm Russ Yelton, president of Yelton and Associates. We do economic development work. I've been fortunate to create 5 business incubators / technology commercialization centers around the state, with a number of them in rural Arizona. And so we're excited today to talk through some of the lessons that we've learned. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. You have a chat box. So if you would like to submit questions in the chat box, we'll try to answer those as we go through. This is really meant to be more of a discussion. We do have a few slides to talk about 2 of the rural areas we're working in, but we're generally just going to be talking about some of the experiences we have around policy and some of the ideas we have on how we can all work together better.
Great, thanks, Russ. So Russ and I met through the Flinn Foundation, and we're just so grateful for the Flinn Foundation and all that they've done. And we do have Flinn staff and our executive director on the line too. And I do want to give a big shout out to both Don and Sarah for all the work that they do at Flinn Foundation, putting these seminars together, these webinars, and just also all the work that the foundation has done. Like I said, Russ and I met through Flinn. Russ, early days, came down and actually helped AREDF set up both of our incubators that we have here in Cochise County. So we've continued to work together. Our passion always aligns, and I think you'll see that clearly today. Russ and I all often present on things together, and that's why he's also on the advisory board for AAED, because once you're in that circle, you get pulled into all kinds of work. The other thing that we want to do real quick is to thank our sponsors. I mentioned AAED, Arizona Association for Economic Development. So thank you for your sponsorship of this. The SBA, specifically with the SBDC, the Small Business Development Centers. They're close partners of both Russ and I of any of the work that we're doing in rural communities. So we want to thank them. Of course, the Flinn Foundation, and then my organization, Arizona Regional Economic Development Foundation. So thank you to our sponsors.
Yes, thank you to our sponsors. And we have a survey question for you. Would like to bring up. So our first question is, are you in rural or an urban setting? And the second question is, what is Rambo's hometown? Take just a second to answer those.
We're just waiting to get those results back. It always helps us if we have a better feel for our audience, how many are from the urban areas and how many are from the rural. So as we go through, we're making sure that we've tailored this to our target market. Oh, look at that. Well, that's interesting. I like that. About half and half, really. No, we've got way more from urban Arizona. Good, perfect. You're going to learn so much from us rural folks. So as we're going through the presentation, those of you from the rural areas, please feel free to use that chat area and answer some of the questions too, because Russ and I are good facilitators. We have a passion for rural Arizona, but we also understand that we don't have all the answers either. So those of you from the rural areas, please feel free to use that chat room. Again, like Russ said, we want to make this as interactive as we can on these webinars. All right, that second question. Oh, I bet you it was the rural people that got that answer right. Rambo's hometown is Bowie, Arizona. So there you have it. Bit of trivia.
Yep, you never know what you might learn. Great. All right, with that, I would like to go into our brief PowerPoint presentations. So I'll be starting talking about a little town called St. John's, Arizona. If you don't know where St. John's, Arizona is, you go up to Show Low and you keep driving about 45 more minutes. It's about 15 minutes from the New Mexico border. So as you see, St. John's was founded in 1875. It was the original county seat of Apache County. It still continues to be that. It's up at US Route 180 and has a population of around 3,500 people. Next slide, please. So Apache County itself, as you can see, is very expansive, lots of open land and space. The county itself was created in 1879, and St. John's and other areas here, have been here for a long, long time. Lots of cattle ranching uses of the land out there, as well as farming. Next slide. This is St. John's City Hall. It used to be a former car dealership. When you're a small rural area, you use the things that you have available, and they renovated this a couple of years ago. Next slide. So a median income in Apache County is about $35,000. It's one of the poorest counties in the United States, actually. The average male income is about $38,000 and females about $24,000. So females make about 63% of males, and about 15.3% of the population is below the poverty line. Next slide, please. But you'll find in these small rural communities, there's lots of passion for what makes them work, families, events. This is the fairgrounds that they have in St. John's for Apache County, celebrating things like Pioneer Day, San Quinn Festival, the county fair, and even their Christmas light parade. Next slide, please. However, there are challenges in our small towns like this. This is actually the grocery store for St. John's. If you want to go to a regular large grocery store, you're going to travel about 45 minutes back down to Show Low, or you can go here or the small hardware store that has a very small grocery. Recently, 2 reports showed that 42.5% of children in Apache County are actually malnourished. Next slide, please. As I said, though, in small towns, they use the assets that they have. This is a teen center called The Loft. A few years ago, a local juvenile judge was looking at what they were doing with their teens, and they realized that the juvenile center itself was taking about $2.5 million a year to run, and they were incarcerating on average 1.75 teens a day. It made absolutely no sense. So they took their juvenile detention center, they turned it into The Loft, this teen center where teens, once they hit 9th grade, can go until they graduate from high school. So they have everything from computers for them to use, gaming, music centers and all, and they have reduced the amount of referrals to the juvenile center by 65%, and now they operate this center for about $200,000 a year. Next slide, please. One challenge that we do have in some of our rural communities is the lack of proper ordinances. A lot of these communities are, wanting to be standalone, but as things change, as they need to do more economic development, there's the need for them to address issues such as what you see here. Next slide, please. As with a lot of communities, COVID has been even more destructive in rural communities, losing stores, losing jobs and space. And so as they have other issues and other challenges we'll talk about, such as lack of broadband, that's imperative for us to be able to rebuild these economies. Next slide, please. This is a local hotel, also closed, recently purchased, hoping to get back up. Right now, when I travel to St. John's, I stay in a FEMA trailer located at the fairgrounds with my dog until they get this back up and running. Next slide, please. But you'll find great things in small towns like this, such as Dr. Adam Patterson coming in, getting a welcome sign. Dr. Patterson actually grew up in St. John's and was able to come back. So they really celebrate getting people back and giving them recognition. Next slide, please. So it's a beautiful place, lots of good things going on. Unfortunately, one of the most recent things impacting this community and the communities around it is the closing of the coal plants that have provided the bulk of the jobs and is the major employer for the area. So as we talk to through some of the strategies and things that we're looking at, we'll talk about how this community has decided to address that. Next slide.
All right, so now you have gone to the big city of St. John's, and now you are entering Bowie. And for all of those of you that on the chat said it right, congratulations. As David said, you got extra points for saying the name of the community right. Now, I guess the other thing would be, how many of you can tell me where that would be located, right? It is actually a very small unincorporated town in southeastern Arizona. The first time that this community participated in the census was in 1910, and so since it's unincorporated, there's not really a start date. Next slide, please. So this used to be the one and only. Thank you, Heather. Of course, Heather knows where this is. She better. Heather Floyd is from Cochise County. This is the Rafters. It was the only restaurant in Bowie. There was a little shop inside this as well, but due to COVID, this is now closed. Fun fact, one of our County Board of Supervisors used to bake the pies that were inside the Rafters. Did you know that, Heather? So next slide, please. This is Skeet's Tavern, which is right along the main street. Back in the 70s and so forth, this was a place a lot of the people, the high schoolers used to come down and party, so I've been told, but it's closed. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the Geronimo Teepee that is in Bowie also. Next slide. Starts to give you a feel for the community as you're looking at. So this is their post office, and this photograph was taken for Rambo days. So those of you that are Rambo fans, this was Rambo days. We have our Rambo t-shirts on, and this was taken in front of the post office. Next slide, please. I think you might think this was a St. John slide, but it's actually a Bowie slide also. A lot of them are the same. This is the Geronimo trailer park. Next slide, please. Again, just, you know, kind of giving you the experience of the community. Next slide. More of the community. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just to give you a feel of what this looks like. As you can see, a lot of empty, vacant buildings. Next slide. Next slide. It's the library and the court. Next slide. So I didn't mention the population in Bowie from the last census was 449 people. So that's why you'll see that there's really not a lot here. This is the home of Pistachio Farm here. And next slide. This is their biggest industry that they have. And this is the plant. Next slide. I thought you should see some of the pecan trees. Next slide, and pistachio trees, sorry. Another empty building. Next slide. And this is their water tower. The reason I have this picture here of the water tower is we just now got this, and Heather is on this. She'll know this well, and I think there's other people from Cochise County that are on this Zoom call. They'll know that there were lots of issues with their water. Water would go down quite a bit. It wasn't safe water. And so we just got a new management company into the community just very recently, and actually I think the transition is still happening. The way that we know that the census is off, and we'll talk about how important a census is. I told you that the number was always right around 449 because that's what was recorded in the census. However, the water company has 202 meters, and we use a multiplier of 3.5 in the industry, so that gets you closer to 700 people. So then you can see the fact of having just 400 and some in a census to where the real number is 700. Just again shows you how important a census is and that people are participating in that. Next slide, please. Fresh jerky, this is on your way up to Safford, where people will go for their doctor's appointments. They'll either shop in Wilcox for groceries or in Safford. Next slide, please. Another building along the way. Next slide. I think this was the same photo that you saw in St. John's, but it's not. It's in Bowie also. Next slide, please. This is the school, and again, this was taken during Rambo days. The important thing that I want to tell you here is in the Bowie School District, it's district number 14. There are 65 students in K through 12th grade with 10 teachers. And I know Dawn is listening in, and so Dawn, this is not new to you. The average daily attendance is around 52, and it is the highest tax rate in the county and one of the highest in the state of Arizona. The other thing that I want to tell you about Bowie is it is the second poorest county in the state of Arizona. It's the second poorest county. Next slide. And of course, no small community is without its churches. And I think there's one more slide maybe. Nope, that was it. All right, so we just wanted to take you on a little tour of these two communities so that you could get a feel of what they're like and their realities of rural Arizona. Russ?
Great, yeah, and we have our first question already. We know how critical investments can be for rural communities, but what is a lesser known misconception you wish urbanites learned about rural areas? You want to tackle that?
That's tough, right? There's a lot of ways that things that you can tell people. Everything from our slideshows, right, where we hit on the schools, the water and the infrastructure. And I know, Russ, you're going to spend some time talking about the infrastructure, but someone also put about the hospitals, and healthcare is huge. We are very fortunate to say that we have Chiricahua Health, and again, those that are down here in Cochise County are familiar with that. They have mobile units that drive out to these places to administer healthcare. Russ and I have talked about that in the rural communities, what you'll find with COVID, it didn't change anything. It just put a flashlight on the problems that we already had.
Yeah, I would also add to that.
Issues, Russ.
Yeah, I would just add to that too, some things you don't expect. For example, St. John's school system is one of the top school systems in the state of Arizona. They're very focused on education, and that's why programs like the Loft that I talked about, when those students go to check into the Loft, there's actually an electronic system that lets the administrators know if they've done their homework. And if their homework's not up to date, you get to go to a little area and do that before they get in. So some of the beauty here is they're really focused on their children and on their development.
Thank you. One of the questions was from Linda, I believe, asking about how that's measured. This measure that I got was from the health department, so I'm not sure how they're using that metrics, whether it's from personal or not for that definition. Excellent question. I can look that up. The other stats that we got there from Cochise County is that it was also one of the most rural communities with 22 people per square mile. So I don't know if that helps you with your definition.
Yeah, and when I was referring to that for the Apache County, most of the federal programs I work with are looking at income levels and streams. And so that's how they do that comparison. So a couple more questions here.
Right, so this one, and You know, I don't, from Echoing Hope Ranch, I know that I've met you before and I don't have your name on here, but it's the funny thing is Russ and I, we speak just about every day, just on different issues that are happening and throughout the work that we do. And Russ pointed out that he wanted everyone to know what partners looked like in rural communities. And I'm going to let him speak about that. That's something that we always focus on. And really your whole thing about how we pool the resources to help each other. And, you know, when my application to get into Flynn, one of the questions that I was asked was, you know, what is my passion and how do we do that? And I said, you know, I'm going to tell you, graduated from Tombstone High School. One of the things to know about people from rural communities, we're super scrappy and super resourceful because we know what we have to do to get outside of our community. So we know that it's the drive up to Phoenix. We know the issues that we're facing, whereas sometimes, and not to say anything, you urban people, but you can just walk across the street to find a partner. It's a very easy connection for you to make at a coffee. But for those of us in rural communities, we have to drive that stretch of highway to get to our partners. We have to really be a little bit more creative about that. And I'm going to turn this over to Russ because it was a whole conversation that he led last night that we're having.
Yeah, definitely. The partnerships are, you know, even more critical in rural communities because you don't have that many opportunities. One that I would highlight right now is one we've been working on, and it's broadband. So lack of broadband. So we know broadband affects everything from your basic economic development, telemedicine, telehealth, education. You know, it's huge. If you live in St. John's, there's no OBGYN, there's no pediatrics. We just don't have that there. And so recently, in conjunction with our partners at the ACA, the Arizona Commerce Authority, they awarded several broadband feasibility study grants for us to try and look at, okay, how do we tackle this? It's such a huge issue. It's very difficult to get a large corporation, a large ISP, internet service provider, to come into a small town of 2,500 or even a smaller town like Bowie. And so what we've done is we started working with other communities near us, Springerville, Eager, the Round Valley area, saying how do we work together to come up with a customized solution that makes sense through this partnership. And through this discussion for St. John's taking the lead here, we've actually landed on a nonprofit model that the Economic Development Administration has gotten very excited about, as well as the Commerce Authority. And it's about these partnerships. So how can we create a small network using a nonprofit model so we get the internet here and then we distribute it? We already have fiber in some of the communities. The challenge we have is not the middle mile, it's the last mile. And so those partnerships of figuring out how to work together, even though some of the other partners decided they want to use a different technology, we're all working together to try to solve this. And at the end of the day, we suspect a hybrid model between the nonprofit model we have and some of the for-profit models will actually address this issue.
Great, thank you. I'm scrolling through the questions and doing this at the same time. Some of the things that Russ and I really wanted to start talking about too is just some of the landscape of rural and urban and how, you know, how politics, infrastructure and education fit that. And so we're looking at the questions and we're trying to make sure that we're covering the issues that you're talking about. I think, you know, one of the easiest things you all know is just the difference in population. And then how does that translate into the services? I hit upon the census, super important for the communities. I think the governor yesterday was talking about the census and that they are so happy with the turnout that it was. And I think the number I heard, and don't quote me, it was either 93 or 97% of the surveys are coming back. As I dug through that was in Maricopa. So, I mean, 97% in Maricopa looks a little bit different than, like I said, the example in Bowie when you're looking at, you know, the census is only reporting 500 people and there's actually 700. It makes a difference into the resources that that are in those communities. Russ, did you want to add something to that?
I was going to say on the census, yeah, same thing in St. John's. When I was up there recently, the chief of police was actually putting a video on his Facebook account because everybody in St. John's is on his Facebook account talking about the importance of the census, the fact that they estimate it's costing them $2,000 per person that does not complete the census. So helping them understand this is not big government tracking, this is done, you know, every so often, and you need to get involved, and it's really big for the community. And a lot of that's just education. and letting them know what's there. We had another question here. Are communities repurposing buildings to help local organizations? I can tell you absolutely in St. John's, that has been happening, looking now to use some vacant space in the back of their city hall for actually a workforce training center. Also working with some of the local landlords to try to figure out some of the nonprofit groups and others, veterans associations that can help. How do we get them here and how do we support them? And then the second part of that, real quick, was just how do we stay abreast of what's happening? I think that's being involved in your different organizations, such as NACOG, Northern Arizona Council of Governments, the chambers that do exist. I know St. John's doesn't have a chamber at the moment, but in St. John's, a lot of information gets shared at their churches. Through that, there's a big faith community. And then in St. John's, just to highlight another way that they get a lot of information out is through the water bill. So they actually put a flyer in the water bill to let you know what's happening. And I know that the city right now is trying to redo their entire website so they can get better at getting those kinds of information out. But it's a challenge when you have people living on 40-acre plots and they don't have internet access, and some of them can't even get cell phone access.
Right. And to Russ's point, in Bowie, they do have a chamber. So those of us in Cochise County, Nancy Jean Welker is no stranger to us. She does everything. She runs the school board, she runs the chamber, and I think she was on the water board for a while and a bunch of other things. But that's the same. They own what is it called outside the billboard, right? It's the billboard that's right off of the I-10. And so that's how they get their revenues into the community. But you're right, communication and asking people to fill out a census when there's a lot of skepticism about what's done with those numbers, privacy and all those things. It's really hard to convince people to fill out the census.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things we wanted to touch on a little bit, Mignonne started on, was on politics.
Yes.
And how it's different, but then now there's also lots of opportunities. I know not St. John's, but one of the other small towns near us had an election for their mayor and last time, and it was 14 votes. That was the difference between who got it and who didn't. And so, they know each other, and that's good. But what we see in a lot of rural communities, at least my experience, and Mignonne, jump in, when we start talking to them, who's your state representative? Who are you talking to? Do you talk to the congressional delegation? Do they know, who's there? A lot of them aren't connected, and they don't know, how to talk to them or how to approach. I know in St. John's, we had a situation where there's a river that goes through. And this river, the silt in it keeps getting backed up in the sand of where it was going to flood the town. So the town took a backhoe and they went and they took the sand and the silt out, right? And so you're like, okay, problem solved. No, they get a notice from the Army Corps of Engineers that they had to go through permitting to do this, and promptly issued them a fine of $300,000. Well, if you think about a small town whose budget ended last year with $90,000 in the bank, $300,000 is devastating. So they were looking at a 20-year payment plan. We were able to get in touch with O'Halloran's office and chief of staff, who is a Flinn-Brown fellow, and I was actually able to get that reduced to zero by having a conversation and explaining to them what was about to happen had it not occurred. So sometimes just helping them make those connections can really pay off.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of really good questions and conversation happening on here. I love it. I failed to mention at the beginning that this is being recorded and that within 24 hours, it'll be pushed out on the Flinn website. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that as well. So there's a really good question here on how to support small businesses and entrepreneurship. I have to tell you, this is such an excellent question. And in the rural communities, Russ really helped us develop both of our buildings that we have here in Cochise County. And we are trying to replicate that model wherever we go. So a way to support that is if you have an idea, if you're in a small community and it's all about connecting the resources to that community back. Russ really, I can tell you from experience what's happened, but Russ will tell you that there's no one answer to putting in an entrepreneurial center. I had seen the work he did. I told him, you know, when we started ours down here, I don't think I can mirror yours. I don't think we have that amount of population, and I don't, you know, so really helped me walk through what that should look like in our community. So I think the way to support that is by letting us know so that we can get those resources into the communities. And then I think for people that are on here that are wanting to do something, reaching out to us and saying that you're willing to be a mentor. Russ I keep going back to Russ because he's really the expert on this, and I've just learned so much from him, but he's really created some excellent mentorship programs that those can then be used into these smaller communities.
Yeah, and I think the thing to realize is when we say promote and support entrepreneurship, it doesn't mean that every town needs an entrepreneurial center or incubator. It's actually the opposite. These take a lot of resources. So how do you bring together what you have? You know, whether it's a federal agency, small business development centers, you know, working with them, you're already paying for them with your taxes, trying to start a SCORE chapter of retired people and bring those things together in the community. But every community is different. For example, we created a program in the city of Maricopa, of all places. After we looked at it, what they really needed was a program focused on home-based businesses. Every morning, 80% of their population gets up and drives out of town because they don't have the jobs. Last count, over 50 new companies participating in that, all the way back up to Northern Arizona with NACET, Northern Arizona Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology, because you have GORE there, with a focus on medical devices, medical products. So an initial 10,000 square foot facility with some labs through EDA, Economic Development Administration. If you're doing rural development and you don't know Cindy at EDA out of Seattle, you absolutely have to. Great resources. They put $2 million into the first facility there, and because we were pumping out jobs and companies, but Flagstaff did not have the infrastructure. We didn't have research laboratories. We didn't have all of this necessary infrastructure. We were able to go back to EDA, get another $4 million to build a 28,000 square foot accelerator program. So those companies that move from tier 1 status to tier 2 have a place to go, and we keep those jobs within that community. Then if you go further north up into the White Mountain Apache and Navajo, we created it's a Native American Incubation Network, which was a virtual program back in 2012 that's still in existence, working with everyone there from farmers and co-ops we had a gentleman that was doing computer repair, and he was the only gentleman in the whole area that could do computer repair. He had more business than he knew what to deal with. So I tell people a lot of times in rural communities, one job created there is the equivalent of 10 in an urban area. So it's very important. And then just back real quick, I know we've got more questions, you know, supporting those businesses, you know, a lot of buy local campaigns, you know, what do you have that's there? One of the things we're looking at in St. John's is actually a beef processing center and a food kitchen. So we can process hard food products and actually export them out into other communities and help take care also of some of the nutritional challenges. So.
Yeah, so there's some fantastic questions, and I'm trying to get to them in order, and Dawn is doing a fantastic job of helping me. So Carolyn asked a question about tourism and what is in a community that can be used. I think Russ explained that, you know, tourism is fantastic, but you also need some sort of an industry. Again, with COVID, we realized that if you don't have tourism, then what can you do to fill that in? So the work that Russ is doing is fantastic. In Bowie, we're just trying to get basic infrastructure, but you're absolutely right. So the other Paul asked a question that is, you know, it's back to the thing that Russ and I spend a lot of time talking about, and I'm going to paraphrase here, Paul, is why should you care about rural Arizona? You know, and I go back to the, you know, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And, you know, again, with COVID, people are realizing that they don't have to stay in the bigger places, that they can move into these rural communities. But again, if they don't have the basic infrastructure, then that becomes an issue. And Russ, I'll let you add to that as well, of why should these urban areas care about rural?
Yeah, well, I would say one of the big things is as we're doing economic development and we're helping to create businesses in rural communities, you know, your business may create 5 jobs or 10 jobs, and that's a huge success. And if something happens to that company and it closes, it's not the same as having a 500 employee company in Phoenix say, hey, we're leaving and we're not going to be here. I think also just from a diversification standpoint, each of these communities have different things that they can do and different ways that they can contribute to the state economy. And if we highlight those again, it gives us diversification across the state, which is really important. It makes Arizona stronger when we're all working together.
Yeah, the other one, I love this, and again, we've spent a lot of time talking about when people come from a large city to educate us in our rural communities, how they have that better. We know, and this is the way it should be done. And so I'm in a rural community. I know how that all happens, but I think the funniest story is for IEDC, which is the International Economic Development Council, I'm a volunteer, and I always go into the small communities because that's my passion to help them. So I'm in this little town, and you get assigned a team, and my team members were from DC, from the Maryland, from the Baltimore area, and we go into this little town in Madisonville, Kentucky, and the guys are all in suits, right? And they come in their suits, and they're going to tell these little coal mining town how to do the business. And I'm trying to tell the guys, this isn't going to work. You have to lose your tie, lose your big city ways. And so it's a fantastic question that when you're coming into a community that, you don't have all the answers. You might have some of the tools. And I think it's really important to know that you may have some of the tools and present it in such a way that here's some tools that might help you, and I'm a resource for you to use, not that, I'm coming down to save you. Because honestly, in the small communities, we don't feel like we need saving. We know what we need. We just need some help. But so your perfect point about without you coming off as you're the urban savior. So that's really good point. And again, another thing that Russ and I spend a lot of time talking about.
When I first moved to Flagstaff, one of the first phrases I heard was the great state of Maricopa. And I'm like, well, what in the world do you mean by that? And they're like, yeah, we're isolated up here. Our nickname is poverty with a view. And so, we don't get the representation. We don't get looked at. And I think that's a misconception. I think that's if you don't show up, you don't get a seat at the table. And I think we have to encourage more of our rural leaders to make that trek, because you have to go where the decisions are being made. And if that's where they are, that's where they are. But helping them and educating them to have the tools to actually be a part of the conversation, because again, we're stronger working together. Great.
So there's another question that ties in really well about financial literacy for residents fit in with rural development goals. That comes back to the education piece that Russ talks about. In a lot of the schools, they start these really great pillars just of, your basic financial literacy, just basic health care, which also ties into the questions about the COVID testing. I have to say, in the rural communities, we've been pretty resourceful about getting COVID testing into them. I know there's somebody on this from CPLC. We're partnering with them also to get COVID testing. But again, there's a lot of resources that we need, and we want to be able to deliver those in a way that works for those communities too. And again, where they don't feel intimidated. So it's finding the right partner that understands the culture of the community that you're working in. So because Russ might have one partner that works really well in St. John, that same partner may not work very well in Douglas or in Bisbee. Because what I tell people, if you've been to one small community, you've been to one small community. They're all different. They share some cultures that are the same, but some cultural traits, I should say, that are the same. But the cultures in themselves are still really, really different. And I know, Russ, you can speak to that too.
Yeah, well, and I think too, again, it's looking for resources. So example, financial literacy in rural communities. We're working closely with the University of Arizona. They have a great program that covers not only that, they also cover nutrition. So we're looking at that piece. And then they also want to look at the entire family. How do we help people deal with stress? Because if you're in this community and you're losing your job at the coal factory, there's stress. You've got to deal with the finances. You've got to make sure your kids have food. So we're able to partner with some of the universities to actually come up and provide some of that programming, which helps us as we build out some of the other centers with EDA, because it is impossible sometimes to get a four-year university to come and build a facility in a small town community. However, it's very easy to find a department that has a researcher who is passionate about nutrition, for example, Dr. Scarmella that we work with, who wants to come and sees that long-term multi-generational impact. So again, it's back to those partnerships and looking at what resources we have as a state that we can bring. Talking about culture, just real quick story here. We were fortunate last year to recruit a company from California to St. John's. So a metal company doing metal working. And anyway, so they buy the old grocery store. Everybody's freaked out about that, right? Because that's where we were trying to get another grocery store, but they're bringing 50 jobs. And so when they showed up with their 18 wheelers with all of this equipment, they realized we don't have a forklift. We don't have, we don't have the people to get this unloaded. We had members of city council bring their trucks, their forklifts, unload for those people that equipment, get them in the building, get them set up, and be sure they have what they need. So that's one of the beautiful things that you can find in a small town, that the people that are making those decisions are going to show up, roll up their sleeves, and actually help you do the work if you need it.
Yeah, so there's a question these are all such excellent questions, and I'm looking at the time, and I'm glad we decided to do questions as we move along through the presentation, Russ. There's a question about the California influence and as property owners are coming in and buying up property. In the rural communities, and please, we're grateful for people coming in and buying up things, but a lot of times when that happens, they're not creating the jobs, right? So they're driving up the property values in the communities, which for those of you that really study city planning, and community plans, it drives them up, and then those families are not able to purchase their own homes. And so again, work through IEDC, we were doing some work in Camas, Utah, which is outside of Park City, right? So what happens is it drives up all the prices in Camas. Those people can't even afford their own homes anymore. The other part of that is, and they're not creating the jobs because they're buying a second home, a third home, they're using it as investment properties. And so there's got to be a way with building codes and what you're doing there as planners and permitting that continues to make that affordable to the communities in which they're purchasing these homes. So it does impact us. You're grateful that it got purchased. But I also know in Bowie, somebody from California came in, bought up a bunch of properties there, and then didn't maintain them. And then put a chain link fence around, and then the water company wasn't able to get in to do the water meter. And so it creates these issues again. There's a way to make that work, but again, it happens with education on both parts.
Yeah, and I think in 2 examples I can give in Flagstaff, when I decided to move from Asheville, North Carolina there, about 20% of the homes are second homes. And so we know we also have some wealth there. So in Flagstaff, we created an angel investor group specifically for those people that had those second homes because we knew they had the income for that. In St. John's, what they've had to do, having people come in and buy a 40-acre tract of land and then go, wait a minute, there's nothing around me. How do I get this and that? So they've had to go start working on their planning zoning processes. So they're now generating some fees for the city because it's very cheap to live there. In fact, yearly taxes on a $90,000 house is $52 a year in St. John's. But what this also does is creating a new demand of new people coming in that are looking for new restaurants. They're looking for new amenities. So as we're supporting the small business and entrepreneurs, as we hear what those things are, we help get them started. We were excited in St. John's 2 weeks ago. We have a new barbecue restaurant that opened up. And so now I believe we have 5 restaurants in town. So it gives the ability to have those people come in, understand what they're looking for, communicate that back to our local people to try and get those businesses started.
Yeah, I saw a comment here, and I'm getting ready to type that, but I just wanted to address that. In no way are we bashing anybody that's coming from outside into a community. It's really about the cultural sensitivity and understanding a community, the community understanding what's coming in. And so there's a way to make that work. Heather will remember when Walmart came into Benson. It was huge. People were outraged that we were getting this big box store and all the things that were happening around that. But there was a way to work with the Walmart and the business owners, which I was in the Small Business Development Center at the time. And what we did was Walmart was really very open to helping the community. And what we were able to do is have the bike shops that were in the area come in to find out what kind of bikes Walmart would be selling, right? And so the place where small businesses and those mom and pops can capitalize on and make their money is on the service side of it. So then they could see that the bikes that Walmart was going to be selling, then they could go back and say, okay, we can repair those bikes. We can maybe do, some classes on that. Maybe there's something that we can do around what Walmart's selling, because we all know in economic development, you can't compete in the price, but you can do complementary services. So by no means are we bashing anything. We're just saying there has to be that cultural sensitivity. And Russ and I work to bridge those kinds of things together. When Russ is working with a company coming in, having them understand the culture of that community. The example that I gave was in Camas, is having those people, and in Madisonville, having those people realize that when you're in a rural community, this is how you engage. And these are sort of the rules of engagement. So we certainly don't mean to ever offend anybody.
No, and it's about education on both sides. In St. John's, for example, we had a hemp grower come to town, and there was lots of opposition to hemp because there was lots of education that needed to be done. One of the common myths that I heard very early on was this is a gateway drug to marijuana. And we had to explain to them, if you smoke hemp, you're probably going to do it about one time, not what it's for. And we start talking about, we were able to get a new concrete plant up in St. John's. Well, they're interested in hempcrete. They want to take the hemp, integrate it into concrete because it makes it lighter, but it's more durable. We're then able to connect them back down to the University of Arizona and their advanced materials departments on how to do that. And then they realize very quickly, all these jobs are coming here. But it's about working together. The metal company that I mentioned that came realized very quickly that there wasn't enough broadband for them to do the transfer of files that they needed to do the online marketing. So we're working with the AT&I, who has fiber in town, to do a pilot wireless from the high school to them. And when we were telling them we were going to do this, they said, oh, the high school's right there. We said, yeah. And they said, well, when we're set up, we want to have students come in. We want to do tours. We want to look at projects that we can do with the high school students and how we can kind of work together. So a lot of times it's just getting everyone on the same page. I know Mignonne spends a lot of time with that as well, and just not coming in with preconceived notions on either side, because again, it's better when we all work together.
Yeah, I know there's some questions and comments about the opportunity zones and so forth. We all have our personal feelings about some things and how these opportunity zones work. I know the opportunity zones that have been carved out in Cochise County, and they are in places where you really can't take advantage of them. And I know Heather, again, is here, and she knows the areas that I'm talking about. For those opportunity zones, I think what could happen there is low income housing. And we've worked with other fellows on seeing what we could do. And I mean by that through the Flynn Foundation, our Flynn fellows, on what we could do to get housing into those. Unfortunately, we would have loved to see our airports or some sort of place where we already had some sort of infrastructure that we could build upon to make that work in an opportunity zone. So there's pros and cons to it. Of course, if you really follow those opportunity zones, you know that there's still so much more that needs to be flushed out on those, and no one's really understanding, and some stuff has already been set. And so it's hard for the smaller communities to take advantage of that. Paragraph on that. I told Russ the other day, I was on a call with an elected official who was letting me know how the problem about the rural communities is that we're not sophisticated enough, and that we need to learn how to be sophisticated. And I countered that by saying sophistication isn't the answer, it's bandwidth. And again, those of us that are in those communities, we know what has to be done, but you only have X amount of hours in a day. You only have so many things that you can get to. So again, it's back to bandwidth. And so how do you partner with somebody that can, really tap in and help you? And so again, the Flynn Foundation is a great place for those of us that are in the network to be able to reach out to our other fellows and say, hey, this is a project I'm working on. I really need a lot of your help.
Yeah, and there's a good question in here about opportunities that are unique to Arizona border communities. I think that's a great question. I think that's where, again, as we're having people go back and forth across the border, what can we create? What businesses can we put to meet the needs that they have there? We know we have or have traditionally had, at least my understanding, a large population from Mexico come into our border communities and spend money. And so again, I think it's back to culture and making sure we make the appropriate opportunities available and maximize, whether it's pistachios, that Mignonne, your group has, or something from another community. And again, it creates a way to work together to promote across the different communities.
Oh, so I like Michael's question there. Michael asked, oh, now it's scrolling, so I hope I don't lose it. Other than leveraging our own network experience, how can we be an ally for all our rural neighbors? Reach out to the communities. We each have a passion for something, and I think that's, those of you that are on this call, you have that. And so, near and dear something to your heart, Russ got pulled into St. John's. I don't think that was ever on your radar to be in St. John's, and then there you are working in St. John's and doing a lot of the work that's up there. Bowie has just, it's about an hour and a half from where I am, but Bowie just landed on my radar. Nancy Jean called and said, can you help? We need help with the water. Russ is going to get pulled into broadband, helping us do some broadband work in there. So again, I'm looking at these comments and I'm seeing a lot of it is about capacity building. You were so right. And that was one of our things that we're looking at, is how do we improve rural and how do we bridge that together? And building capacity was one. Doing the shift of mindset, I think that really talks about coming in and trying to be the urban hero, but really making that difference and helping. And then Russ talked about too, just revising some of the policies that are out there. A lot of the things are never going to be fair, but they certainly can be equitable. And then Tiffany, thank you so much for your comment about there and mentioning the AmeriCorps Vista program. You're right. And so if you're looking at the chat, I don't know if the chats can get saved as well when it's being recorded, but I feel like Russ and I are really trying to get as many of the questions answered. And so those will definitely be on the recording.
There was one other question earlier about supporting broadband in rural communities. Right now, the Commerce Authority, again, has put some preliminary funding in that. EDA also has money as soon as we get the networks figured out. One of the things that happened, we do have a state broadband director, by the way, Jeff, that you should know at ACA. If not, we can make that introduction. They were hoping July 1st of last year, they were looking at a $10 million grant to really push into the rural communities. And unfortunately, as we know, due to COVID, the state budget just stopped. Well, they're hoping the legislature is going to go back in January. And so if this is something that you care about and you understand how it can impact the rural communities, get in touch with your representative. And especially if you're in the urban area, get in touch with your representative and let them know how important this $10 million investment, which is a fraction of our state budget, will have a huge impact on our rural communities. And again, it is all about working together and seeing that impact in the rural communities, because when the rural communities are healthy, your urban communities are healthy.
Right. Paul Brierly is on a lot of calls. I drag Paul into everything too. And so one of the things that when you talk to Paul and he hits upon this is just the definition of rural. Like, at what point are you rural? Sometimes you're not rural enough. Sometimes you're too rural. And that definition sometimes cuts out some of those communities that are on the cusp of that. And so you're right, Paul. I don't know that you're right. That definition isn't very helpful. It's the same when I was in the Small Business Development Center. They called small businesses anything under 500 employees, which we just, in a rural community, we laughed at, because if we could have anything that was even close to the 500 would be funny, to us, and we would be so happy to have that. So again, some of those definitions, you really have to plug in that's one. And then also the startup one, right? In the SBA, if you're looking at a startup company, is it, Russ, 3 or more years you're considered a startup? Where when you're in a rural community, you're talking about a startup as I just started yesterday and I have 1 employee myself. Right. So you're right. Those definitions are, sometimes you need to carve those out a little bit better, and we do need to do a better job. Yes, Russ, the name of the person for the broadband director, you can find that on ACA's website, his contact information, but it's Jeff
Sabata.
Sabata. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah. And his
There we go.
email is
So
there.
Russ just put it up there to the panelists.
Yeah, and if you're interested in that and have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me as well, because this is an initiative, again, through many communities. We're just trying to assist. We're only one small piece of the puzzle, but we've done enough work here now with enough different groups that we want to make sure everybody has that same conversation, and we figure out what we can take in one community, if it's appropriate, get it to the next, because one of the major things we have to get into these communities is telemedicine. It is just a huge need for not only our senior citizens, mental health, and just other basics that we need.
Right. There's two people that I need to give a shout out to. So I know there's a lot of questions about how do you contact us. I think the easiest way, I mean, Russ and I could absolutely give you our contact information, but I believe Dawn put hers into the chat area. And when you go back onto the Flynn website, you'll be able to find Dawn, and then Dawn can get that information out to us. I think that would be the easiest. And I have to give a shout out to my friend Catherine, who is on here. She said, please, that small plug for the Heritage Fund. Yep. So I worked with Catherine. Of course, she's a fellow. And then we worked on a project at Fort Huachuca. And now that I showed that photo of Bowie and Geronimo's teepee, I'm going to come back to Catherine and see if we can't do something about that. So thank you, Catherine, for your comments. We're watching the clock. We have 5 more minutes. Lots of information. So the other thing I'd like to tell you all is, hey, don't you want to see part 2 of this? Because Russ and I didn't even start. I have to show you guys, we had this whole little list of things we were going to talk about. And I think we got to 6.2 of our 11-point list. So we would love to, talk to you all again and set up some format to do this. And seeing more on here, but Russ, if I'm going to look at the chats for a second, if you've got something to say. Oh, Carrie invited everybody to AAED. They are a sponsor here. We have our so go to their website for more information. There's the fall forum, and AAED is a super partner of everyone's, especially around rural Arizona. There's a rural committee that you can join as well. And so lots of information. Like I said, Russ over here on my screen, he's one of our advisory board members. People are putting in their information into the chat area. I know a lot of these people on the call, as does Russ, as does Dawn. So if you need to get a hold of us, again, the easiest way probably to do that is to reach out to the Flynn Foundation, and we'll get you connected.
Yeah, there was another comment on here about one rural community thinking another community is urban, although they're probably a rural, and that's commonplace. We see that all the time. And I think it's about building bridges. 2 of those communities that were mentioned, I'm not gonna name them specifically. I know when we were doing work at NASAT, in one of them, there was just a lot of tension between them because they thought that they had to compete with each other for the businesses. And, in my experience, when you're working with a business that's wanting to relocate, you're going to figure out pretty quickly which community they best fit in. And rather than shoehorn them into a community beside that may not be the best fit, we want to get them to the right place, because if they grow, then members of that other community can come work, they go spend their money, and it helps everyone.
Yeah. Are there any last parting words? We're so happy to be able to do this again. We just want you to understand that rural Arizona is how Arizona started in the first place. And so there's just something very endearing for those of us that are from rural and work in rural. We love our rural communities, and we really like everybody that's on these calls and participating, and whatever we can do to help your communities, please reach out. That's what this is all about, is that civic leadership and our civic duties to help our neighbors. So I'll throw it to you for closing comments, Russ.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it is about those partnerships, those strategic partnerships, where we all come together, whether it's, working with a larger university outside of your area or your rural neighbor. It is truly about coming together. So I would just encourage you to really do that. Get to know, common issues. Again, broadband is just one that we all know. It's huge throughout. And so if we can start working together on those, when we do go to Maricopa and we go to our state legislatures, they understand the true impact of what we're talking about on the state as a whole.
Yeah. I think Don's going to be so proud of us because it's at 2:58 and we are kind of wrapped that up. We really want to just thank everybody for being on the call today. Again, we really want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Arizona Association for Economic Development, the Small Business Development Center, and of course, our fantastic hosts here at the Flinn Foundation and the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership. And again, okay, I'm seeing another message here. Oh, they're saying, Russ, we're going to do a part 2. And then again, that the recording will be posted. So again, thank you all so very much. We appreciate you taking an hour out of your crazy days to join us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.